All right, everyone, welcome to SEC Breakdown. We come your way I believe it's going to be Wednesday night now. 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock Central Time, and we bring in the best. This is the team right here. This is the best team I can think of outside of Tuscaloosa to talk some football here when we talk Chad Niefling, also David Waters, and also Michael Ball. And this is SEC Breakdown. I'm Mark Rogers of Mark Rogers TV, and we come your way each and every week just to talk football. So it doesn't matter if it's May or June or what the month is. We know that in the SEC you can't get enough of talking football. So spring practice starting up for most teams around the conference, already has for a few, will for the rest of the bunch in the SEC Eastern Division. That's going to be our focus tonight. So since I host and I get to choose, I'm going to start with Tennessee because I think they should be the odds-on favorite to win this division this year, considering how close they were this past season, taking Oklahoma, college football playoff team, to the wire, a team that they dominated for 3.5 quarters, what happened to them against Florida, taking Alabama to the final 5 minutes in Tuscaloosa, and then annihilating Northwestern in the bowl game, a decent Northwestern team that won 10 games. So, Mike, let's start with you being the Tennessee guy and your thoughts about spring practice coming up here shortly and what you would like to see out of the Vols.
Spring practice is going to be interesting for Tennessee. Of course, the headlines, the narrative is going to be about the all-field issue. So the first thing that Butch Jones is going to have to do in Knoxville is he's going to have to get his team focused and focused on the field performance. So they're going to have to work on the mental game, and they'll have all spring to do that. So that he's going to have to address the all-field issues. On the field, the three things that I would like to see Tennessee work on, first and foremost, the vertical passing game. If you look at the passing, Tennessee's offense did very good last year, but if you look at the detail of the passing statistics, the number 2 reception guy and the number 5 reception guy were both running backs. Which is not uncommon. It's not a gee whiz stat. But what the shocking part is that if you look at yards per attempt, the running backs had 8.5 yards per attempt. No wide receiver who had more than 10 attempts had more than 13.5 yards per attempt. So the yards per attempt were within 5 yards of all the receivers and both of the 2 primary running backs. That's indicative of a very ineffective vertical passing game. If you have the 3 running backs in the backfield, Kamara, Hurd, and quarterback Joshua, vertical passing game dimension, that offense has a chance to be explosive, very explosive. So I think on offense they have to really focus on the vertical passing game, and that's really Josh Dobbs' accuracy, his consistency, and the receivers getting a little bit better downfield. The second thing I think that I'd like to see them improve on is the line work a little bit. The line has been both young and moved around the past 2 years. I think they have a chance to have a solid performance out of the line this year, so I'd like to see them improve line play just a little bit. And then on defense, they have to finish. You got the big 4th down play with Oklahoma, multiple 4th down plays against Oklahoma. You have the heartbreaking 4th down play at Florida. So the Tennessee team was just snake bitten on 4th down, particularly early in the season last year, heartbreaking for the fans. So on defense, again, more mental than anything. They have to replace some safeties, but more mental than anything, they have to work on finishing on the defense and limiting those big plays, particularly late in the game. I think the additional depth, I think they'll be a little bit healthier on defense this year. I think that will help. They just have to get that depth, more reps in the spring practice. So, Mark, those are the 3 things I'd like to see Tennessee focus on: the vertical passing game, a little bit of improvement in the line play, and depth, consistency, big play prevention, and finishing strong on defense.
Hey, David, if there's one team in the SEC, if there's one team really in college football across the board that people expect to jump from a top 15 or 20 team to serious college football playoff contention, it's Tennessee. We've seen the 4 consecutive top recruiting classes sandwiched in there, those 2 top 5 classes, and Vols fans are hoping that comes to fruition and expecting it this year.
Right, and Butch Jones too, going into these big games, he got a lot of blame on late clock management and especially in the Florida game, so he got another year at Tennessee, a year of experience, 2 years in a row where they've ended the season on great streaks and then, really impressive in the bowl games. So now, we see growth from the coaching staff with Butch Jones and now the team that he's got just full of now just senior, junior-laden talent. All of it is got guys coming back. I agree with Mike, with the secondary, coming back was a huge get for the Vols, but now it's going to have to be everybody else stepping up and helping him. And they're bringing Shoop in from defensive coordinator from Penn State, going to come in and try and probably get rid of those late game woes that bit Tennessee so much. So I do agree with Mike. The vertical passing game, of course, everybody's going to harp on quarterbacks, especially in this conference when there's not many to choose from, and Dobbs coming back being probably one of the top two behind Chad Kelly. So yeah, he's going to come in. He's going to work on that vertical passing game. But I really do think that secondary, they can get that shored up. Tennessee, I tell you, that's really the two big questions: vertical passing game, that secondary. They get those two issues fixed, and there's no reason why they can't challenge for SEC East and maybe more.
Chad, this is a marked team. This has to be the year, right?
Yeah, I think this is the year. You look at them in 2016, there's really not any excuses. Tennessee's had a real youthful roster the last couple of years. This year, you bring back it's already been pointed out, bring back a very seasoned defense. Of course, you add Shoop to the mix. The impact of adding him to this defense is going to be massive. I think he'll simplify things. The defense is going to be a lot more aggressive up front. An area where I will be looking at on that defense is the defensive front. The issues with Alexis Johnson, a JUCO transfer, the 4-star. How that kind of, even though he pleads not guilty to the charges, how that kind of plays out and whether or not he actually gets to get on the field, maybe an area to watch, because that too deep for that defensive front could definitely come into question later on as the season progresses. But I think with everything they've got right now on the roster, on the defensive side, Tennessee is going to be a solid team. Plus, you look at their schedule, getting Florida at home. They do have to travel to Athens, but the last time they went down to Athens, it was 35-32 with kind of a haphazard Tennessee team on the field at that time, and Gurley put up 200-plus yards rushing. I don't think you'll see that type of performance against this Tennessee defense that's going to come in pretty salty. So I look at that. The schedule's favoring them. They do have A&M on the schedule. They have Virginia Tech and Bristol, so that'll be interesting to watch. Tennessee is basically, yes, they are going to be the team looked at to win the East, and come media days, that's what's probably going to get the vote is Tennessee. Barring any major injuries like they had at the beginning of the last season, I think this is a team to definitely be contended with. They do have some deficiencies we've seen, like they talked about in the passing game. Some of that was due to injury. Marquez North never really appeared. You had some guys that just could not get it going in that aspect, but you've got one of the most deadly backfields in the SEC with Kamara, Hurd, and Dobbs. If Dobbs, if the plays break down and he has to use his feet, Mark, so long, it's going to be a long day for you, because they can go just as easily. They can be blue-collared as they can be finessed through the air, but we just have to see more of that aerial attack, and I think you'll see that. They've got some major guys coming in, some young guys that can step up on that roster, so I'm looking at Tennessee as being the team that's going to be marked. They're going to get the best from everybody, so they better be ready.
So Tennessee gets started this next week in spring practice on March 7th. For Georgia, it's a week later. Chad will stay with you. And for second straight year, we pretty much have the same quarterback competition there in Athens. Bryce Ramsey, Grayson Lambert, of course, coming in from Virginia. He really had a 2 or 3 game stretch against some lesser teams where he barely let the ball hit the ground, and then he got a wake-up call against Alabama. It's a Georgia team that surprisingly void of playmakers, dynamic playmakers on the perimeter for one of the few times we've seen. And, of course, a different head coach on the sideline for the first time in 15 years.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting storyline, guys. The spring, a lot of people, when they look at spring practices and they look at, previewing the spring and things of that nature, a lot of it for me just, being on the sidelines and being around some teams, a lot of it for me is I look at the young guys as this is an opportunity for them to get reps and to learn. This is an education process as much as anything in the spring. And then the fall comes in, and that's when things really get serious and things start getting fine-tuned, and that's when you're really going to start seeing some movement in positions. But I look at this team. Kirby Smart's got a massive task ahead of him, guys. You look at the fact that Georgia has become accustomed to winning no fewer than 8 games. Only once have they done it between 2001 and 2015. But you turn around and you look, Georgia went to the SEC title game in 2005. And the last major bowl game for them was in 2007 when they played the Sugar Bowl. So that's been the thing is that he's been tasked with is to try to take this team that's already here, bring in a new coaching staff, bring in a new set of recruits, and take the talent that he has, and can he take what he learned at Alabama and under Nick Saban and make it successful at Georgia? We've seen a lot of coaches when they come in their first year in the SEC have a lot of success. You look at Coach Mack, you look at he's a perfect example. Coming in his first year, you look at Gus Malzahn, first year head coach there at Auburn, had success. They typically do. Then it's the SEC teams tend to catch up. I'm curious to see how Kirby Smart, being a defensive-minded coach, how much does he give the reins to his offensive coordinator, who has not been really too successful as of late. He's been a part of 2 rebuilding programs at Tennessee as well as at Arkansas before heading to Purdue. So I'm curious to see how this all works out with a true freshman, Jacob Eason, who is possibly going to push for that starting quarterback job.
Yeah, a lot of people like Eason. Of course, Nick Chubb's going to be back. They lose a couple linchpins on defense at David, and of course, Leonard Floyd's gone. Your thoughts about Georgia coming into the spring?
Well, I think the big thing coming in with Kirby Smart is it going to be a change of culture there? Even though Georgia was winning, around the conference and around the nation, Georgia was still kind of seen as a soft team. They were never that big dominant team under Rick, and then he brought in Jeremy Pruitt to help toughen that team up, and that still didn't really happen. The defense was good, but there was always those games where they would let teams just run all over the field on them. So as this change of culture with Kirby Smart coming in, I think that's going to be priority number one. And then, but like you said, and Nick Chubb, will he be ready by the time the season rolls around? So I think this spring will be very important to get Sony Michel some more reps, and Brendan Douglas, and then some more of the young guys. But they have Elijah Holyfield coming in the summer and the fall for practice, but they got to, really, if Chubb doesn't come back, and they got to replace some of the guys on the offensive line, it's going to be tough for Eason to come in, and if Chubb's not fully healthy, we saw with Grayson Lambert once Chubb went out that it was really hard for him to carry the Bulldog team by himself without the running game there, and then Malcolm Mitchell's gone too, their big play receiver. So Georgia has a lot of, like you said, Mark, they're void of playmakers. They really have to try and come in and find playmakers, but not only on offense, but on defense too. You mentioned they missed now Jordan Jenkins, Leonard Floyd, Jake Gaines. Those guys, there were some big-time playmakers for the Georgia defense, but they have the right guy coming in with Kirby Smart and his background. So, he's got the pedigree, but can he get the job done? There's a lot of comparisons to Will Muschamp and him being the defensive style coach under Nick Saban, and how much does he? And Chad brought it up. How much does he let the offense just take over and not put everything on the defense?
Mike, still tons of talent in the secondary. Georgia, possibly one of the best secondaries in the country, coming back, and with the guys moving out of the NFL. Into the role of being the playmaker on defense in the front seven for Georgia.
I'm sorry, Mark. Can you say that last sentence again?
I'm just setting you up with Georgia here, whether you want to take it offense or defense.
Yeah, Mark. I think Georgia is the perfect illustration of the narrative throughout the division. They've got a ton of talent both on defense and offense, but the theme of the division for the spring is uncertain quarterback and transition in the coaching staff. You mentioned that they do have a ton of talent in defense. Their secondary is going to be really good, but David mentioned that the past few years their defense has underperformed. I'm not so worried about the defense. I look at their quarterback situation, and really only 2 teams in the division are coming in with really a settled quarterback situation. You got Lambert, you got Ramsey, and you have Eason. So what are they going to do there? We saw, you mentioned it, we saw last year when that offense became one-dimensional, the passing attack wasn't able to carry the load for the offense. So I think the story for Georgia is very much the story for most of the division. Who's going to be under center? How will they perform? And what will the impact of the coaching transition have on that team? For the first time in 15 years, there's a lot of questions during the spring at Georgia. Those fans have gotten used to a steady repetition. It was the tongue-in-cheek joke, all right, another 8, 9, 10, another 9 or 10 win season, no championship. But this year, they really don't know what to expect. A lot of question marks in Athens, and that fan base, I don't think, is used to that after a generation of certainty.
And what you said about the defense underperforming, I think 2012 is the best example of that. It wasn't a bad defense; it was a good defense, but it should have been a great defense based on what they moved on to the NFL and almost played for a national championship, came 4 yards away. I'm going to be interested to see if Kirby Smart, as a defensive guru-minded guy, will make a difference from the head coaching spot on the defense. We've seen it happen in other places, i.e. Tuscaloosa, Nick Saban, defensive genius coming from Michigan State, LSU, and the Miami Dolphins, and then he goes to Alabama, and there you have it, the huge upgrade in defense. So, Mike, we'll move it on to Florida, and your thoughts about the Gators. Coming into last season, we didn't know who was going to play quarterback. The offensive line was in shambles, but they survive and they get to an Eastern Division championship, and they had the great defense. I don't know if the defense is going to be as good this year for Florida.
Well, I don't think I think that the defense will still be solid. Of course, they're losing probably the best defensive secondary player in the conference, if not the nation. I think Florida's in an interesting position. They probably have the lowest expectations of any 10-plus win team coming into the spring. A lot of people forget about the victory against Tennessee. They forget about the dominance they had against a very good Ole Miss team, and they just remember those last 5 or 6 games of the season, and, of course, a disappointing bowl win against Michigan. Again, with Florida, a lot of questions. Who's going to be back there at quarterback? Is the defense going to be as good? And is McElwain's second season going to be as good as his first season? So I'm very interested. It's kind of the reverse of Auburn last year. Florida finished with 10-plus wins and a good bowl berth, but they have tremendously low expectations. The opposite of Auburn last year, where everybody thought Auburn was going to be the best team in the nation and kind of disappointed. So I'm really interested. I'm having a hard time figuring out Florida. I think it's going to be interesting to watch that team go from spring all the way through the end of the season. I'm having a hard time seeing that team. I'd love to hear David's thoughts on what he thinks about Florida.
Exactly, David. We're right in your wheelhouse in Gainesville here with the Gators.
Yeah, and I really hate to say it's as simple as the quarterback position, but it kind of really is. We kind of knew that under the whole Muschamp era when that big failure there. If they could just get a quarterback, they might be in good position with that defense. We saw in the first half of the season last year, they found their quarterback. Florida was undefeated. Will Greer gets suspended, and you saw the wheels fall off. So this spring's very important. They're going to have four guys in the spring compete for the job with Luke Del Rio, the transfer from Oregon State. Has some experience in Doug Nussmeier's offense, and now he's going to go through spring as probably the guy in charge for the quarterback position. And can he get it and take away with it? Purdue transfer, Austin Appleby, grad transfer. He's eligible right away to come in and play. And then they got 2 freshmen early enrollees with Felipe Franks and Kyle Trask. I don't really think it will be one of the 2 freshmen, so I think Austin Appleby, Luke Del Rio will fight for that position at the quarterback, and we'll go from there. But they are going to need some help from the running game. Kelvin Taylor's gone. He did a lot with not much to work with last year at the quarterback position. So now they've got the top junior college running back, Mark Thompson, coming in. We'll see what he can do, and Jordan Scarlett and Jordan Cronkright at the running back position. So we saw with Greer, he unearthed the star in Callaway, but the whole offense, with the tight ends and Brandon Powell as another receiver work. Once Greer went out, they got kind of short with playmakers. So this spring's going to be very important, helping find more playmakers besides Callaway, and can one of them help spread the ball around? Defense, Jalen Tabor may come in and help take Hargrave's spot, because Hargraves, said this past week at the Combine, Tabor was actually better than I was this past season, so that should make Gator fans pretty happy.
Yeah, Chad, a tough act to follow here. David just wrapped us up on Florida. Have any thoughts about the Gators? Couldn't score any points late in the season?
Yeah, here's the thing with Florida. I look at Florida, and despite the with Trayon having to be at the quarterback position, which a lot of guys, it kind of came a little bit of a joke at times with Trayon being the quarterback because of his inefficiencies as quarterback. But you look at Florida, number 8 in the SEC, they finished last season. I still think they're quite capable. It's not what Coach Mack wants to see in his passing game, but I do think you're going to have some competition there. I'm interested in the fact that the talk about moving Trayon out to the wide receiver position, how that's going to work. He's a very dynamic athlete. I do think that there are very capable quarterbacks there now on this roster. you turn around and you look at the rushing attack. The rushing attack was ranked 13th in the SEC this last year, and I think that's a big, that's you've got to improve. Coach Mack, the way he likes to run things, you saw it at Colorado when he was there. He likes to use that run to kind of set up the pass and vice versa, but you got to be effective on the ground. He has the talent there. It's just a matter of getting the guys. He had a really young roster on the offensive line last year. Those guys are going to come back a little more seasoned. I think this team is going to be, again, Mike pointed about the fact that they're not talked about it much and they're kind of being overlooked, so to speak. I think this is a team to watch out for in the East because they do bring back some pieces. They've got some young guys on that roster that got experience last year. You've got some more youth coming in with this recruiting class that's come in, so you've got some talent on the outside that'll be some playmakers. So I'm interested to see how Florida rebounds in year 2 with Coach Mack at the helm.
So, yeah, what do you think about the Kentucky Wildcats? We won't see Patrick Tolles this year. He's transferred up to BC.
Yeah.
They missed the bowl game last year. We expected them to break out and at least reach postseason play in a weak Eastern Division, and they couldn't get it done.
Yeah, here's the thing. You look at their schedule. Kentucky, to me, is a little interesting. You talk about Tolles being gone. I'm curious to see how much of that, if it tends to come back and bite them. Stoops, for whatever it's worth at this point, he has to get this team to a bowl game this year, bottom line. And, the expectation was to at least make it to a bowl this last year to see some type of improvement. We didn't get there. So this year you're looking at that. You're talking about going to Florida. Last time they went down there to Florida, they gave them a run for their money, but Muschamp was the head coach, so we kind of write that off a little bit. You got South Carolina coming in, Alabama. They've got to go to Alabama. They turn around with Vandy October 8th. And they draw Mississippi State out of the West as well, which that's going to be an interesting transition without Dak Prescott as the quarterback. So they got to go on the road to Missouri, yet another new head coach. Possibly some new philosophies coming in there as well. Georgia comes on the road. This Kentucky team, I know Stoops has made some hires here in the offseason. They're trying to get this air raid attack going on the offense, but they just can't seem to get consistency at that quarterback position. And that's something that they've got to find. Tolles, as good as he was at times, he was just as bad this last season. So they have been able to get some decent runners back there, and they've got some guys that can create some space and make some plays. But I'm still interested to see how they recover. They lost Stamps. He went into the NFL. For what it's worth, guys, Kentucky's defense wasn't that bad at times last year. They were able to we saw some glimpses, but this is by far a team that's ready to compete in any major way within the SEC East. But this is the year that they've got to at least get 6 or 7 wins, or we could be talking about Stoops being on the hot seat.
Yeah, so with Tolles out of the way, Kentucky fans get what they wanted, and quarterback Drew Barker, much heralded out of high school. He threw 70 passes last year, 35 completions. New quarterbacks coach, new offensive coordinator at the Commonwealth, and Boom Williams, obviously a playmaker on offense for the Wildcats. So David, does Kentucky have a chance to break through?
I think they do, but just how much, it's been the last couple of seasons where Kentucky has started really well, but then it's been the last half of the season where they've just fallen apart. They've given Florida all they could handle 2 years in a row. So they play these good games early in the season, but they somehow just can't keep it up. And now, and Chad brought up, they have had good defenses, and that's what has kept them in games, but they lose 6 starters from that defense coming in, so they have to replace a lot of talent. And, Stoops is a defensive guy, so he's got the pedigree to, maybe step up and help that. But, these were guys he recruited, and when these recruiting classes were getting, impressive reviews from with recruiting services. So, he got to replace, and then I think 6 of the top 7 tacklers are gone, with the 6 starters. So there's a lot of talent to replace on that defensive side. But they're going to bring in Eddie Gran from the offensive coordinator from Cincinnati. He's going to probably bring in he was kind of a pro style background, but he's kind of mentioned that he wants to play a little, everybody wants to play a little bit faster now. So that's what he's going to try and bring to Kentucky. So, can they stop that late season swoon? Is there a different kind of mindset this spring that they're going into to help that with 2 years in a row that's happened? And we'll see what Stoops, he's got a lot of pressure on him, like Chad said, to step in and finally get to the bowl game. And they've lost to Louisville 5 years in a row. So this is a big, big, big year.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Gran comes in. He's their 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 years. Stoops is 12-24. It's kind of time for him to start winning. We mentioned Boom Williams, Dorian Baker, their best wide receiver, two really good players, but they don't have a plethora of players. It kind of starts and ends with those two guys making plays on offense. Mike, what do you see out of the Wildcats?
Yeah, Mark, I agree with both Chad and David. I'm not sure Kentucky really has a chance to move on up in the SEC East. I think Kentucky's issues are indicative of why playing in the SEC is so hard. Chad mentioned you can see glimpses of talent, and that's absolutely true. They do have glimpses of talent, but when you look at those late season collapses and the lack of consistency, that speaks to depth, and that's what separates a team that finishes 5th, 6th, or 7th in the East from the teams that win or finish in the top 4 of the West and finish in the top 4 of the East, is that depth. The ability to have players come in the 3rd and 4th quarter. That's what Kentucky doesn't have. That's what's going to keep Kentucky from getting above that 5th slot in the East. They just don't have the depth. David talked about the mental aspect. They've had these 2 late season collapses, both of which ended with losses to Louisville. That's a big game. Up there, obviously, it's bigger than basketball, but it still means something to the football fans. Chad, I think Stoops is already on the hot seat, and if they don't get to a bowl game this year, which I don't think they will, I think this will be the last year for Stoops in Lexington.
So even with a down Mizzou and South Carolina and a pretty soft non-conference schedule outside of Louisville, not thinking postseason play, huh?
I don't think they're going to beat South Carolina. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. Vanderbilt's going to be better. That Vanderbilt-Kentucky game, I think, is always a toss-up. Mizzou, also a toss-up. If they win both of those games, I think they'll be looking at Louisville again as the game that determines whether or not they go to the bowl game. I just don't see them beating Louisville.
So Kentucky gets started in just a few days on March 8th. Same thing for Mizzou. Question marks all over the place with the new head coach. Mizzou, the darlings of the new entries into the SEC just a couple years ago, winning back-to-back division titles. Now they're at the crossroads. Gary Pinkel, the stalwart of that program, built the program, sustained it, stabilized it, the guy that really held everything together. He's gone. Matty Mock out of the program, not the type of game-changing defensive talent last year that what we saw previously. And we talked about Georgia being devoid of playmakers, Mike. How about Mizzou? Pretty much the same thing last year. Just, wow, the offense was really putrid in much of its SEC games.
Washington, Columbia, same narrative as a lot of the East, quarterback issues. They a little bit disappointed with the freshman that came in last year. Very disappointed with Russell Hansborough. I thought he was going to have a great year. He did not have a great year. The Barry Odom hire, I think, was questionable. We'll see how that goes. Barry Odom's probably a really good coach, but I think Missouri may have gotten a little conservative there, coming from the inside. They're just like Kentucky, just like David said on Kentucky. They're losing a Missouri defense. I think Missouri is going to have to find its identity over the next year or two. I think that's going to be hard to do. Much like Kentucky, I don't see Missouri competing in the East very well this year. I think Missouri is going to have a tough road to hoe over the next 2 or 3 years until they find their identity in Columbia.
We all talked about it a few weeks ago, right after National Signing Day. Missouri, the only SEC state in the footprint that did not produce an ESPN 300 player, and that's just not an aberration in 2016. That's pretty much the way it goes for Mizzou, so they've got to do some creative things to coach up players and find them elsewhere. David, what do you see out of Mizzou?
It's going to be really tough when they have to replace their probably best starters on both sides of the ball. Russell Hansborough is gone. Kentrell Brothers is gone. So, he's going to start. But Odom's going to have to come in and start from scratch and find some, more playmakers. They do have a new guy coming in, but not new to us. Chris Black, the Bama wide receiver transfer. He's from here in Jacksonville. I got to see him play a lot. He's a really talented guy. I'm trying to, he didn't get on the field a lot at Bama. Bama's shown the propensity, if you really are talented, they'll play you. So it's kind of weird he didn't really get on the field there a lot, as much as I thought he would. But maybe Missouri's a good fit for him, or a team that's void of playmakers. I really like the hire of Josh Heupel. That's a pretty good, I think, a hire for offensive coordinator for develop Drew Lock a little bit. I like the way Drew Lock kind of started last year, but he did kind of fall off. I think some more teams got more tape on him and stuff, but that's what happens with freshmen sometimes when you throw them in when they're probably not ready. So can Heupel come in and build a rapport with Locke and get him comfortable enough to take the next step in this Missouri offense? But this is kind of a work in progression type of season, I think, for Missouri. I don't think many people expect much from them with new staff and losing the big playmakers. So they played hard for Barry Odom. You saw the videos and stuff when he was hired. Missouri players loved it, but I agree with Mike. It was kind of the safe hire, and not sure it was actually the right one.
Yeah, so Chad, Missouri kind of at the crossroads here. Barry Odom, as Mike mentioned, they stay inside, in-house, and go with what's comfortable there, and we'll see if it pays off.
Yeah, I kind of questioned this at first, like the other guys did. I really did. I had some questions with it, but after kind of reading in and digging in, talking to some of the guys that that do the beat there for the Tribune and whatnot, I kind of got a feeling that this was the best thing for them because of the fact that Odom already knew the blueprint. And Pinkel has, despite not winning the SEC, but he did get to the Eastern Division title. Didn't win it, but that being said, there was a blueprint in place. Odom was familiar with it. I do agree with David in the fact that there's going to have to be a relationship built with Josh and a quarterback, especially considering the fact that the offense, only scored like 9.1 points a game in the SEC last year against SEC opponents, and that's just really, really, that's god-awful. There's no other way to put it. The offense, as far as passing and rushing were concerned, finished last in the SEC in both aspects. The defense, number 2, right behind Alabama. And again, this year the defense looks to be pretty salty again. It should be the team's biggest strength, and with Odom's expertise in that area, I think that you won't see much of a drop-off in the defense. So there's probably going to be a lot more leverage on Josh, the offensive coordinator, to get things going on that offense. But when you bring in a guy like Black, Alabama is a lot more talented as far as their depth is concerned at that wide receiver position than a lot of people may have realized in the last couple of years. Even though Amari Cooper was there, and yes, he was the man on campus, and we saw that breaking records, but you had guys that were there. There's so much talent at Alabama in those positions. When you're signing 4 and 5 stars year in and year out, a guy like Black gets lost in the shuffle. I think at Missouri, he's got a shot to be a standout with this team. And again, the defense is going to be what leads them, but they've got to find a way to get above this mere 9 points a game against SEC teams if they want to have any kind of shot in the future.
Yeah, it's a team that came within that much of losing to an American Athletic team in UConn that attempted a fake field goal to win the game outright, and also it could have been much worse than it was for Mizzou. Kentrell Brothers, as David mentioned, gone from that linebacking core, but they bring back some really stellar defenders, as Chad alluded to there. Michael Scher, one of the best in the business in the SEC, 93 tackles, 9 tackles for loss. Donovan Newsome, one of the better players at that position as well. And this Arian Pinton, one of the top cover corners as well, coming back in the SEC. We saw the free fall from South Carolina, Chad. 3 consecutive 11-win seasons. Connor Shaw, quarterback, all that talent on the front 7 on defense in particular, led by Jadeveon Clowney. Then the drop to 7-6, and then the free fall last year. But then Will Muschamp steps in and really rallied the recruiting situation there after they were buried in the 70s and 80s with about 6 weeks left to National Signing Day, and he really rallied and brought in a nice recruiting class. So things may be looking up in Columbia.
Yeah, and this is going to be key because this defense, and that being Muschamp's specialty, we know that. David knows that more than anybody. He had to endure those hellacious years there with Florida. But that being said, South Carolina, number 14 in total defenses last year, finishing in the SEC, I believe they gave up a little over 2,600 yards rushing. I believe it was about 2,500 plus yards in passing. That's just not going to cut it if you want to be competitive in the SEC. Granted, losing the old ball coach, the head ball coach there, that really does make a difference, not having your leader there. But what I found interesting about this entire hire was that Will Muschamp had stated that I learned my lesson and I'm going to do things a little differently. Yet he goes out and hires Kurt Roper as his offensive coordinator again. So, and he hired on a lot of the similar staff that he had at Florida. So, to me, I kind of find that a little comical. But that being said, I think there is some talent there for Kurt to work with. Pharaoh Cooper did jet. He left early for the NFL. I will say this: watching him in the combine, he wasn't stellar by any means. I think he could have definitely used another year of playing. He is a guy that's pretty versatile. You will miss him, but he was more of a vertical threat, once he got open and was able to run straight forward. Not much of a guy that was east-west to make you miss type of guy. But you do, I think they lost Brandon Wiles as well, thinking about that. But you got Perry Orth coming back. You got Lorenzo Nunez, who's going to be definitely a versatile player. He's able to use his legs a lot. Whether Kurt Roper can take advantage of him, we'll see. And, of course, then you got the true freshman Brandon McElwain coming in, who was another highly touted recruit. But like you said, Mark, they made a blaze on the recruiting trail, which is awesome in hindsight. And in perception is reality for a lot of people, so they think this is going to be a big deal. But we go back and we look. Muschamp had success at Florida his first year. I'm looking at this team this year, and there's a lot of work to do. There's been a lot of confusion on the defense, going from 3-4 to 4-3, having co-defensive coordinators with Ward and things of that nature. I'm curious how this personnel is going to shape up and how they can endure the SEC season as it goes along.
All right, March 15th is day one for Will Muschamp on the field with this football team, David. You saw South Carolina, of course, up close a number of times. Your thoughts about the Gamecocks moving forward?
Defense. It was the reason Auburn brought in Muschamp last year, and it took probably half of the season, a little more than half of the season, for Muschamp to finally put his stamp in on that Auburn defense. And toward the end of the year, you could really see that was making a big difference. He's got the similar task here facing him at South Carolina. And Chad mentioned the stats, but 110th nationally against the run, 99th in sacks, finished last in the SEC in allowing 27.5 points per game. So, when we brought up the recruiting and how they just finished like crazy, Muschamp with 8 recruits playing defensive end or defensive tackle. He saw the problem. He knew the problem. He's the right guy to fix that defense. How quickly can it happen? The Kurt Roper hire, yeah, I know it better than anybody. It was downright ugly at times. And then, we saw what Jeff Driscoll did this past year at Louisiana Tech, and Kurt Roper had that same Jeff Driscoll. It didn't happen at Florida, but there were, a multitude of issues at Florida with Jeff Driscoll and Kurt Roper, and then, it never saw. So, he has some toys to work with as far as dual threat quarterbacks go. Brandon McElwain, incoming freshman, maybe he gets thrown in the mix. Roper likes that kind of style, but the defensive coordinator hire as well, Travaris Robinson, he coached DBs here at Florida. But that's going to be Muschamp's defense. So it'd be interesting I think Robinson was more of a big defensive coordinator hire in terms of recruiting. He's the monster recruiter. This is going to be Muschamp's defense, and I think the biggest question, as we saw from how bad that defense was last year, is how quick he can put his stamp on this defense.
So South Carolina, with a bit of a strange schedule in 2016, they finish off with 2 non-conference games, Western Carolina and Clemson, the traditional season finale. They start off with 2 SEC games and a very winnable game to start us out on a Thursday night at Vandy. So, Mike, I'll let you do the take on that matchup, South Carolina, and your thoughts on Vandy as the Commodores have already hit spring practice on February 22nd.
Well, Mark, I'll start with South Carolina. I think the issues at South Carolina, I think the season at South Carolina is going to be far more than X's and O's. I don't know that we've ever went from one head coach to a completely different head coach like we have at South Carolina. We're going from Steve Spurrier, kind of laid back, offensive minded, to Will Muschamp, who is extremely intense and defensive minded. So I think South Carolina is going to be the issue with South Carolina is going to be more than X's and O's. It's going to be the culture of the program. When you look at these teams, these programs who have consistency over generations and decades, even when they change coaches, it's kind of similar. I think South Carolina, with a Muschamp hire, really looked at retooling their entire program. I'm not sure that was wise. So I'm really interested to see how South Carolina's program and specifically the football team, changes its culture from a Spurrier era to a Muschamp era. I'm really interested to see that. I don't think it's going to work out well for South Carolina, my personal opinion, but they could surprise people and see. They do start off in Nashville on a Thursday night, much different than last year where they beat North Carolina, the number 2 team in the ACC. Vanderbilt, probably Derek Mason. Derek Mason's probably the coach on the hottest seat in the SEC East, 2 disappointing years. I would say that Stoops probably a little bit more than Mason just because of the situation of Vanderbilt not being a traditional football school. They went through 4 quarterbacks last year. They have a freshman that's a little bit mobile, can play in that offense. He did not impress passing last year. They were atrocious on offense last year. Had a decent defense. Derek Mason, of course, the defensive coordinator at Stanford, coming over. Vanderbilt's always had a pretty decent, strong defense. That's always been their strong point. But their offense last year was absolutely horrible. I see no reason why they're going to get better, and I'm not sure Vanderbilt wins a single conference game this year, to be honest with you.
And I don't know if it was the Eastern Division, South Carolina way down last year, but Mizzou way down last year from what we saw in 2014 or 13 and 14. But Vandy looked, at least in the standings, much improved. David, maybe not so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's just another one of those teams that's really struggling on offense. But let's not forget that Vandy defense. I'll give them every bit of credit. That defense kept them in, most games they probably shouldn't have been in. It was the first game where they went to Gainesville. It was, after it was Treon Harris's first game where he pretty much struggled. And ever since that Vandy game, Florida struggled after that. And so it was kind of a sign of things to come. But Vanderbilt's defense, they stepped up to the plate on the big national stage that day and almost upset the Gators. But, going back to the offensive side of the ball, well, I'll go back to defense. They don't lose too many starters. So the defense, they're going to be good again. Mason, that's his side of the ball. That's his forte. So, how much better can they be? They're going to need to be a lot better for Vanderbilt to win some games. Quickly, on the offensive side of the ball, can Kyle Shermer really be the quarterback? They really, they brought in Johnny McCrary. They really thought he was the guy. They brought him in from Georgia a couple years ago, but no, he was not. It's another team in the SEC with a very bad quarterback situation. And it doesn't look to get much better. They do have a pretty good running back in Ralph Webb. Can they build around him? But that's really about all they have.
Right, Chad, you're the lucky one. You're hitting cleanup on Vandy.
Thanks. Look, David made a really good point. The defense was solid for Vanderbilt last year, and it really did keep them. They were 6th in the SEC when it came to to the end of the year. They did limit some people to about 5.17 yards. Again, they gave up about 350 yards per game. And if it wasn't for the defense, and like you said, a lot of that was Mason's voice being echoed on the field, so we got to see that. But the offense, much like Missouri. That being said, Missouri was worse than Vanderbilt, so keep that in mind offensively. You got Shermer, you got Ralph Webb. It's a promising combination for Andy Ludwig, so we're kind of curious to see how that's going to work. The line itself, their offensive line, Andrew Delk is coming back. That's a guy you want to watch. He had season-ending knee injury the year before. Then, of course, Derek Mason back at the defense. I believe last year Vanderbilt allowed only 21 points a game, and I think they limited opponents to about 5.2 yards per play. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. Plus, they bring back all SEC linebacker Zach Cunningham. So I think that defense is going to be pretty solid. But that being said, under Derek Mason so far, the offense has just been absolutely atrocious, and that's just something where, if Ralph Webb, the running back, was on a different SEC team, we'd be talking about him in a completely different light and in a different conversation. But he's a lot of the reason why they've had some success on their offense, period, because their passing attack is just non-existent, and defense is what's kept them in a lot of games. A lot of teams didn't want to have to face that defense because you didn't want to be the team that had to lose to Vanderbilt because the offense was that bad.
If I'm not mistaken, guys, and this is a good subject for later at some point, Georgia won the game against Auburn. Florida beat Ole Miss. Other than that, the SEC East got swept by the West.
Correct.
Yep.
12-2. And it's been something similar to that going back to like 07, 08.
Mm-hmm.
Well, pretty much at the end of the Florida run with Urban Meyer in 09, something in that range.
Yep.
So things are going to change at some point, I would think. That there's just too much money and too much pride with Tennessee and Florida in particular to let that go on forever, and also Georgia.
I'll tell you guys, this is something I've talked about on other shows, and we've talked about in the past too. I've talked with you guys about this. The East, since the timing you brought up Urban Meyer, that was pretty much kind of the last leg there. Mark Richt has kind of had to lead the ship a little bit for the East with Georgia, but like we've talked about before, they weren't able to actually just go and get those championships like they were expected to. But every year they were touted to be the team, but then they get smoked at some point, or they lose a game you didn't expect them to. I will tell you this: Fulmer, when he stepped away from Tennessee, things started to kind of tilt in a different direction. Urban Meyer, when he left Florida, that's when the East kind of started to fall off. Then you had South Carolina come in, and of course, Spurrier was able to pull off some wins. Then, of course, the new guy on the block with Pinkel and Missouri. Missouri comes in, and I'll be quite honest with you, it was an opportunistic time for Missouri to have some success because a lot of your powerhouse teams in the East were down. And in order for the East to get back to its prominence to where it was before and being dominant, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia are going to have to rise up, and with the addition of South Carolina at some point, I'm still questioning the Muschamp hire. I would think that anybody would have learned after watching what happened at Florida not to hire this guy as a head coach, but I know there's other people in South Carolina that would argue with me about that. But that being said, I feel like at this point, those programs have got to come back to prominence to get the Eastern Division back to where it was.
Right, boys. Good work. SEC Eastern Division spring preview. Most of these teams getting on the field this week, if they haven't already, in Vandy's case, on February 22nd. So for Mike LeBall, for David Waters, for Chad Niefling, this is our SEC Breakdown show. Join us on Twitter, SEC Breakdown. It's all right there. We have daily polls, at least one per day, breaking down SEC football for you. Of course, we're diving into March Madness, so you'll see plenty of coverage with the men's and women's tournaments coming up as well. All right, guys, it's been a good breakdown. We'll see you next week.
See you later.
We'll see you, Mark.